for the national government. Mr. Speaker, since 2020, our economy has been unwinding from the effects of negative and even persistent global and domestic shocks that have pushed the economy to its lowest activity level. These shocks include the COVID-19 pandemic, second, the global supply chain disruptions, third, the effects of climate change from prolonged drought in 2021 and 2022, and even the floods of 2023-2024. And measures to mitigate these negative shocks embarked on structural reforms under the bottom-up economic transformation have been successful in ameliorating these effects. The efforts have reduced the cost of living and created vibrancy in the economy that has shown signs of strong economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, in several regions, Kenya has sunk into abject poverty, largely because markets in their segments were interfered with or not properly governed. The failure to protect and regulate markets disrupted their development and, more importantly, curtailed further investment in those sectors such as coffee, sugar, cotton, pyrethrum. The institutional failure problem pushed policy to fail. In this context, the bottom-up economic transformation agenda interventions at the bottom of the pyramid are targeted to ensure that the markets are properly governed to work for everybody, and especially the poor. Mr. Speaker, for Kenya to transition from the middle income status of the economy to an upper middle income status as envisioned in the Kenya Vision 2030, two driving factors are important. That is, we must develop our human capital capability, and we have to increase production and productivity. Mr. Speaker, the Kenyan economy is susceptible to the ravaging impact of climate change, as demonstrated in the 2021-22 severest drought, which was more severe, which we haven't seen in the last 40 years, and the events of floods that have led to massive loss of property and life. The most important thing is that these shocks have shifted budgetary resources from economic activity to saving lives and rebuilding damaged infrastructure. And this calls for urgent and decisive interventions, especially to our supply side, which I will later address in this statement. Mr. Speaker, our fiscal policy is geared towards supporting bottom-up economic transformation agenda through continued implementation of a fiscal consolidation plan designed towards slowing down the growth of public debt without compromising economic growth. The fiscal consolidation efforts will continue to target domestic revenue mobilization and rationalization of spending through improved public financial management while reallocating resources in priority areas. Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget process, we accorded Kenyans an opportunity to share their views on how to address the economic challenges facing the country. Kenyans responded to our call and requested the government to address, through this budget, first, the devastating effects of the ongoing floods, second, taxation concerns and cost of living, third, the level of unemployment, fourth, protection of the poor and the vulnerable, fifth, reduction of wastage in public expenditures at the national and county governments level. Today, Mr. Speaker, I wish to assure Kenyans that we have listened to their concerns, and we have spelled out measures to address through this budget. In this regard, the budget highlights, and even the government's plan to strengthen the resilience of our economy to navigate the global turbulence, accelerate economic transformation, and decisively address the overarching developmental challenges in line with better bottom-up economic transformation agenda. It is in this context we have chosen the theme of this year's budget as sustaining the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, fiscal consolidation, and investing in climate change mitigation and adaptation for improved livelihoods. Mr. Speaker, it is now my privilege and honor to present the economic policy context of this budget. Thereafter, I will broadly outline the policy priorities and structural reforms underpinning the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. The proposed resource allocation as well as revenue-raising measures that the government will implement in the financial year 2024-2025 budget are going to be summarized. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to remember that we have one major problem that has three phases. This problem is as follows. There is increased demands for increased spending or expenditures from the government. That means that either we have to finance that through taxes or debt. The second dimension of this problem is that there is limitation and even constraints imposed in terms of public debt accumulation and even the debt carrying capacity of the economy. That, and more fundamentally, there are limitations in terms of mobilizing higher tax revenues, something that we have to remember, something that is quite critical from our side. Let me turn now to the economic policy context. Mr. Speaker, the financial year 2024-2025 budget has been developed against a backdrop of improved global economic outlook. The world economy stood at 3.2% in terms of growth in 2023 and is projected to continue at the same pace in 2024. In the domestic economy, Mr. Speaker, the Kenyan economy is now unwinding from layers of negative and persistent shocks, and some of these shocks have actually have been protected and have a structural and permanent effects on the economic activities. Mr. Speaker, through forecast interventions as well as structural reforms, the policies of Kenya Kwanza government have started to yield some positive results. Economic recovery is evident, with a GDP growth of 5.6% in 2023, up from 4.9% in 2022. This is above the global average and also above the average of sub-Saharan African region. The domestic growth in 2023 was mainly supported by a rebound in agricultural activities given the improved weather conditions and subsidized inputs for farmers. The resilience of the services sector remained strong in that same year. So the overall inflation also declined to its target level at 5%, and in April 2024, from a peak of 9.6% in October 2022. The decline was driven mostly by easing of food and energy prices, a strong pass-through effects from exchange rate appreciation, and the impact of monetary policy actions. And the tight monetary policy has been complemented by fiscal policy measures to enhance food production through subsidy program on fertilizer and seeds. Mr. Speaker, in February this year, the government took advantage of the improved international financial market conditions to refinance the buyback of US $1.5 billion of the Eurobond 2024. The government, through this process successfully removed the uncertainty of the settlement of the Eurobond. The government also successfully issued an 8.5-year infrastructure bond that attracted significant foreign investors, making it the most successful domestic bond issuance in the country's history. Mr. Speaker, these two operations in February significantly improved the market perception, together with a tight monetary policy stance and significant reforms in the interbank foreign exchange market. It has brought stability in the foreign exchange market. As of 31st May 2024, the exchange rate was Kenya shillings 130.20 to the US dollar, from a high of 163 earlier on in January. And this represents a significant appreciation of 18.7%. The appreciation and stability of the exchange rate created confidence and triggered inflows of foreign exchange foreign direct investment, and attracted investors to the Nairobi Securities Exchange. In order to enhance monetary policy transmission, the Central Bank of Kenya has adopted a new monetary policy implementation framework, and this is based on inflation targeting and introduces an interest rate corridor around the central bank rate. The interbank rate is expected to be within this corridor. In addition, the Central Bank of Kenya launched the DAO CSD, a central securities depository infrastructure that delivers world-class level of registry, custodial, and even settlement services for both primary and secondary market operations. Mr. Speaker, I wish to encourage Kenyans and investors to take advantage of the DAO CSD to invest in risk-free treasury bills and bonds in order to grow their wealth and secure their financial future. We have simplified the DAO CSD, and investors can simply use the USSD *866# to log in and invest a retail bond for amounts as low as 600 shillings. This also will be allowed to make investments of government securities all inclusive and include the bottom of the pyramid. Mr. Speaker, the strong economic fundamentals together with the renewed investor confidence is a signal for accelerated, broad economic growth and creation of jobs for our youth. In 2023, the total new jobs generated in the economy increased from 848,200 jobs compared to 816,600 new jobs generated in 2022. And this is attributable to policies implemented, especially when you focus on affordable housing and the agricultural sector interventions. Looking ahead, Mr. Speaker, and considering the ongoing reforms and even additional measures the government is introducing through the budget statement, we project our economy to grow at 5.5% in 2024 and 2025. This strong growth will be supported by ongoing interventions at the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. In this regard, the government will accelerate investment in human capital development and capital accumulation, in market development, protection and regulation, in domestic resource mobilization, in reforming and restructuring government institutions, and finally, and more important, digitization to usher an era of efficiency in economic management to support economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, in order to safeguard macroeconomic stability and protect the fragile economic recovery, monetary and fiscal policies will remain very prudent. The Central Bank of Kenya will ensure inflation rate remains within target while maintaining a competitive exchange rate and stable interest rates. The Central Bank is further expected to safeguard the improvements in the functioning of the interbank foreign exchange market and apply all its instruments to strengthen the monetary policy transmission mechanism. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, fiscal policy stance over the medium term aims at supporting the government's bottom-up economic transformation agenda by delivering a strong fiscal consolidation with fiscal deficit declining from 3.3% of GDP in financial year 2024-2025 from a high of 5.7% of GDP in financial year 2023-2024. This will improve the primary surplus to 2.3% of GDP in the financial year 2023-2025 from a primary deficit of 0.4% in the previous year. I will later in this statement elaborate on policy measures to deliver the strong fiscal consolidation. Mr. Speaker, this economic outlook is not without risks. We continue to witness external shocks and recurrence of extreme weather events that not only affects the economic activities, but also pose major fiscal risks. The government will take appropriate interventions to cushion the economy from these risks. Mr. Speaker, let me now expound on the policy priorities of the government to promote economic transformation and improve livelihoods for Kenyans. First, let me start with the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. To strengthen economic recovery, the government will accelerate the implementation of policies, programs, projects, and interventions in bottom-up economic transformation agenda. First, enhance agricultural transformation. Second, support micro, small, and medium enterprises. Third, provide affordable housing and settlement. Fourth, achieve universal health care. Fifth, support growth of the digital superhighway and creative economy that will support job creation. Towards actualizing these objectives, actualizing development objectives to the public, the government in March 2024 launched the fourth medium-term plan for the period of 2023-2027. The MTP4, as we call it, translates the better aspirations into concrete priority interventions to be implemented by both levels of government. These are premised on the value chain approach with sectors which will target sectors with the highest impact to drive the economy and sustain economic recovery. The key priority interventions focus on the following value chain. First, leather and leather products, textile and apparel, dairy, the tea industry, rice sector, edible oils, the brew economy, and natural resources, including mineral and forest, and finally the construction and building materials. The value chain approach ensures rational resource allocation by eliminating wastage of resources occasioned by duplication, overlap, fragmentation, and ineffective coordination in the implementation of the program and projects, while promoting a whole of government approach to service delivery. To create employment, special focus has been given to investment in special economic zones and county aggregation and industrial parks, diversification of export markets, and market access of goods and services from micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the government will also undertake the following targeted strategic interventions to support economic transformation. First, the government will continue to maintain macroeconomic stability to enhance security, to foster a secure and conducive business environment while protecting Kenyans and their properties. Second, the government will scale up development of critical infrastructure in the country, such as roads, railway, air, seaports, energy, water, and reduce the cost of doing business and ease movement of people and goods, as well as promote competitiveness. Third, the government will enhance investment in key sectors for broad-based sustainable growth by promoting agricultural transformation, growth in manufacturing, environmental conservation, and climate change mitigation, stimulating growth in tourism and sustainable land use. And all this in management will actually refocus ourselves in terms of how we can get moving in these subsectors. Fourth, the government will enhance human capital development through investment in health, education, and appropriate social safety nets for vulnerable groups, vulnerable population, for improved social and economic outcomes. Fifth, the government will support the youth, women, and even persons living with disabilities through government-funded empowerment programs that leverage on partnership with private sector organizations. Sixth, the government will support county governments through transfer of shareable revenues to strengthen their systems and capacity in service delivery. Mr. Speaker, it's important to notice that it is for the first time since the advent of devolution that the county governments are getting shareable revenue, which is surpassing 400 billion shillings. Lastly, implement various policy and legal institutional reforms that will enhance the efficiency of public service delivery. Let me turn now to investing in climate change mitigation and adaptation to enhance resilience. Mr. Speaker, the effects of climate change have become detrimental to economies across the globe, with extreme weather conditions, events affecting lives and livelihoods of millions of people. The rising cost of adaptation are diverting funds from essential services like healthcare and education, and potentially destabilizing the economies. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has not been spared by these negative effects of climate change. the recent unprecedented floods that our country faced following the prolonged drought in 2021-2022 claimed lives, caused injuries to many people, and wreaked havoc on property, infrastructure, and livelihoods. The government responded promptly and undertook short-term measures to mitigate the devastating impacts of the drought and floods. Going forward, we shall formulate and implement long-term climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies to generate strong resilience pathways. Mr. Speaker, our climate action agenda is informed by the need to restore our degraded ecosystem that include forests, rivers, and wetlands. It is for this reason that His Excellency the President has rallied Kenyans to prioritize environmental conservation, implement aggressive reforestation, afforestation, and wetland restoration programs, and reverse the biodiversity loss and even land degradation. In response to the President's call, the government has stepped up climate adaptation mitigation efforts, including green energy, smart agriculture, decarbonizing manufacturing, e-mobility, and green building, all aimed at the attainment of zero carbon by 2050. I therefore urge all Kenyans to support the government's response to the ecosystem restoration that aims to grow 15 billion trees nationwide by the year 2030. Let me turn to policy, legal, and institutional reforms. Mr. Speaker, while we have made progress as a nation, we remain alive to structural constraints that impede the pace of economic development. Aware that sustainable economic transformation is predicated on timely implementation of appropriate policy, legal, and institutional reforms, I propose the following interventions that will improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and strengthen the accountability and transparency of public finance management. First, let me focus on public procurement reforms. Mr. Speaker, in my last budget speech, I informed this House of the government's plan to fully automate public procurement and disposal processes by implementing an end-to-end e-government procurement system. Mr. Speaker, phase 1 of e-government procurement on user acceptance testing and piloting in 12 selected MDAs and counties. This piloting will continue up to December 2024. The system comprises, among others, an e-marketplace, electronic marketplace, for the common use items where prices for various outlets are feasible, allowing intense competition in procurement of these common use items. Once the e-government procurement system is rolled out, all MDAs and executive offices of county governments will be required to fully transition to the system, while state agencies and corporations, county assemblies, and even county agencies will be onboarded in the second phase within the 2024-2025 fiscal year. The system will reduce cost of goods, works, and even services between 10 and 15%, maximize value for money, and increase the transparency of procurement. Second, let me turn to restraining growth of public sector wage bill. Mr. Speaker, the public sector wage bill continues to rise, leaving few resources for development. Public sector wage bill stood at 38.2% of the ratio as a ratio of total revenue in 2021. To contain the wage bill, the government implemented a wage freeze in the financial years 2021-22, 2022-23, in addition to eliminating and streamlining the number of allowances. Further actions planned in relation to containing the wage bill include: first, all MDAs and county governments should review and rationalize their staff establishment to ensure affordability, fiscal sustainability with the right composition and skill sets. Second, the government will roll out a unified human resource information system for the entire public sector starting from 1st July. The system consolidates human resource and payroll data in the public service for access through single warehouse. The system has been linked to the Kenya Revenue Authority iTax to facilitate filing of payee returns. This reform will eliminate the multiple manual and standalone payroll systems. Third, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission will continue to streamline allowances paid in the public sector through harmonization and rationalization of categories, rates, rules for allowances. And fourth, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission will progressively review allowances and benefits in the future, collective bargaining agreements, and align them to the provisions of allowances policy framework for the public service. Third, let me turn to state corporations reform. In order to address the challenges faced by state corporations, including government-owned enterprises, the government will first privatize government-owned enterprises whose mandates are no longer relevant, those that require huge budgetary allocations for bailouts, and those producing goods and services that are more efficiently produced by the private sector. Second, restructure the state corporations through mergers and or transfer back to parent ministries or relevant state corporations to remove duplication of functions, and enhance the efficiencies and synergies in operations so as to optimize use of limited resources. And ensure state corporations are self-sustaining, generate additional revenue to the exchequer, and also ensure quality service delivery to Kenyans. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to implement policy changes to ensure government-owned enterprises realize their full potential. You will note that in 2023, the cabinet approved the ownership policy for the government-owned enterprises. And this is a key governance reform framework. Mr. Speaker, to anchor the policy in law and to give effect to its operationalization, a draft Government-Owned Enterprise Bill 2024 has been finalized and is undergoing public participation. Once the process is completed and an approval granted by Cabinet, the bill will be submitted to this august House for consideration, and I'm seeking support from this House for approval of the bill. Mr. Speaker, we have also prepared a draft Government Investment Regulations 2024 to provide a framework for efficient and effective management of government investment. The draft regulations will be taken through public participation before submission to this House for consideration and, if possible, approval. Fourth, let me turn to pending bills. Mr. Speaker, in the last budget statement, I informed this House that the government plans to establish a pending bills verification committee to carry out a thorough analysis of all stock of pending bills for the period 1st July 2005 to 30th June 2022, and formulate measures to stop accumulation of pending bills going forward. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware now, His Excellency the President inaugurated the Pending Bills Verification Committee in November 2023. The committee received a total of 94,997 pending bills claims valued at Kenya shillings 662.3 billion. Analysis of the pending bill claims submitted by MDAs is ongoing. The general public has been given an opportunity to submit any pending bill claims owed by the national government. The committee is expected to complete its work and submit a report by October 2024 for implementation within the fiscal framework. Fifth, the national assets and inventory management reforms. Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury has initiated reforms geared towards automating assets and inventory management in MDAs as well as county governments. In this regard, the National Treasury will operationalize the assets and inventory management modules of IFMIS, with the module of all MDAs scheduled to launch and go live in July 2024. The rollout of county governments will commence thereafter. These reforms will enable the accounting officers to have visibility of all assets and inventory under their control and facilitate optimal assets utilization. Sixth, let me turn to financial sector reforms. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya banking sector remains stable, resilient, and continues to play its role in mobilizing funds and channeling them to deserving productive economic sectors and activities. The banking sector remained profitable with a growth of assets of 0.3%. It is now standing at 7.74 trillion in February 2024. Credit from commercial banks to the private sector stood at around 6.9% in terms of growth in April 2024 and has benefited key sectors of the economy. The Financial Inclusion Fund, popularly known as the HASRA Fund, and the de-risking of lending to the MSMEs through the Credit Guarantee Scheme have facilitated additional lending to the MSME sector. Mr. Speaker, to position the banking sector to effectively play its role in Kenya's socio-economic transformation, 3 recent reforms have been implemented. First, the licensing and oversight of digital credit providers to address inherent challenges, including the high cost of credit, unethical debt collection, inadequate disclosures and lack of transparency, breach of data privacy, and abuse of personal information. As at the end of March 2024, 51 digital credit providers have been licensed. Secondly, on climate change, the CBK in April 2024 issued draft Kenya Green Finance Taxonomy for public participation that will serve as a tool to classify whether particular economic activities are green or environmentally sustainable, and serve as a guide for banking sector and other market participants in making informed investment decisions or financing decisions. That, to eliminate money laundering and vulnerability in the banking sector, the CBK has revised the anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism and proliferation of financing, and the supervisory framework has been implemented so that the risk-based supervision is enacted, undertaking institutional and sectoral risk assessment and enhancing staff complement capacity for supervision. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya banking sector is exposed to dynamic global, regional, and even local developments, necessitating reforms in this respect. The following reforms are proposed. First, the Central Bank of Kenya intends to progressively increase the minimum core capital for banks from the current 1 billion to Kenya shillings 10 billion. The CBK will engage the market for an appropriate timetable to achieve this goal. This is intended to strengthen the resilience and increase the bank's capacity to finance large-scale projects while creating sufficient capital buffer to absorb and withstand shocks posed by continuous emerging risks associated with adoption of technology and innovation as institutions expand. Second, the central bank plans to amend the Banking Act to provide for stiff dissuasive penalties that are proportionate to the violations committed, support a strong compliance culture in banks, and also make sure that it aligns to international best practice. Let me turn to capital markets developments. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance price discovery and boost income for coffee farmers, the Capital Markets Authority has licensed 14 coffee brokers, and so far, 29 auctions have been conducted under the Capital Markets Coffee Exchange Regulations 2020 at the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. In addition, the authority has approved the direct settlement system, which has been operationalized by one of the local commercial banks. Let me turn to pension reforms. Mr. Speaker, majority of Kenyans remain uncovered with the retirement benefits coverage stands at about 26%. We need to address this challenge. The Cabinet has approved the National Retirement Benefits Policy in November 2023 that requires all entities to enroll all the employees, both contractual and permanent, and pensionable, for registered retirement benefits scheme. To effectively implement the policy, we have initiated the review and harmonization of all the laws governing the retirement benefits sector. Mr. Speaker, to ensure sustainability of the public service pension system, we are revamping the public service pension administration through digitization and re-engineering of the pension management system, which is expected to be completed by December 2024. Mr. Speaker, the informal sector has about 17 million workers, and that accounts for about 83% of the total workforce in the country. This segment has remained excluded from the pension coverage, mainly due to its unique and heterogeneous needs. The National Treasury has established the Kenya National Entrepreneur Saving Trust, KNEST, to handle pensions from the informal sector and anchor the savings component of the hustler fund while providing a channel for voluntary savings. Let me turn to insurance reforms. Mr. Speaker, to facilitate the growth of the insurance sector, the government developed a national insurance policy. This policy is guided by the review of the Insurance Act, which has served its purpose, albeit with progressive amendments, for the last 30 years. The Insurance Professionals Bill 2024, currently under consideration by this august House, will also strengthen the standards of practice in insurance and improve stability and performance of the insurance companies. I now turn to the fiscal framework, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government's fiscal policy is to enhance fiscal consolidation efforts to reduce debt vulnerabilities and rebuild fiscal buffers amid significant global and even domestic challenges. These external and domestic shocks that Kenya has experienced serve as a reminder of the importance of fiscal buffers. Mr. Speaker, the focus of our fiscal policy thus remains to reduce the deficit from 5.7% of GDP in the current financial year to 3.3% in the financial year 2024-2025. We're going to do this through various means. First, domestic resource mobilization. Mr. Speaker, implementation of government's plan for rapid and inclusive socio-economic transformation largely depends on robust revenue growth rate. Indeed, despite significant government investment in reforming the tax structure, the tax to GDP is estimated at 11.5% of GDP as of 2022-2023, against an estimated potential of 25% of GDP. And this is also the convergence criteria in the East African community countries. We therefore urgently need to address the challenges that negatively affects our revenue collection, some of these challenges include: first, there is an existence of hard-to-tax sectors. The economy is dominated by a large informal sector that is mostly outside the current tax instrument, leaving the country to rely on a narrow tax base, and it is time to reverse this trend. Second, proliferation of tax expenditures over the years. Tax expenditures are estimated right now at 2.9% of GDP if you consider the 2022 data. That it has major erosion to the tax base. Third, low tax compliance, largely attributed to factors such as the technical and complex nature of our tax laws and procedures, taxpayer apathy due to perceived inefficient use of tax revenues, high compliance costs, and inadequate taxpayer education. Fourth, there are difficulties in taxing emerging digital economy. The tax system is not fully equipped to deal with the emerging business models that leverage on the digital technology. Finally, Mr. Speaker, inadequate modern technology equipment for use at every stage or exit border points, misdeclaration and even misclassification of goods, inadequate customs border posts, infiltration of counterfeits, smuggling, and diversion of goods. Mr. Speaker, in order to address these challenges and enhance the revenue mobilization, we shall implement a combination of tax policy and administrative reforms. The reforms are premised on the need to ensure that taxes are more supportive to economic activity. They do not distort the market and have a predictable tax structure. The reforms include: first, implementation of tax policy and administration measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2024. Second, implementation of the medium-term revenue strategy to expand the tax base to 20% of GDP over the medium term. Third, to strengthen the tax administration for enhanced compliance through leveraging on technology to revolutionize tax processes, sealing revenue loopholes, and enhancing the efficiency of tax system. And finally, we're focusing on unlocking additional non-tax revenue potential by MDAs through the services they offer to the public. Let me turn to improving the efficiency of public expenditure. Mr. Speaker, turning to expenditures, we should ensure that our scarce resources are used in the most efficient and effective way. Mr. Speaker, in order to move towards a balanced budget and further improve efficiency in public spending, the following bold actions and reforms have been outlined in the financial year 2024-2025. First, rationalization of transfers to SAGAs by at least 30% from the financial year 2023-2024 approved budget, in line with the overall austerity measures, cutting across all ministries, departments, and agencies. Second, curtailing spending on the following expenditure items: foreign travels, rationalization of all training expenses across government, and restricting all training to within government institutions, rationalizing all allocations for purchases of motor vehicles, and suspending purchases of furniture for a period of 1 year, and suspending all refurbishment and partitioning of government offices. Third, the expenditure control measures that include suspension of all new recruitment in the public sector for 1 year, for the next 1 year, audit and cleanse all public payrolls, pension, and transfers to the vulnerable, with a view to eliminate ghost workers, as well as enforce payments of salary scales and that are approved as recommended by SRC, and consolidation of public procurement for common user items. Fourth, minimizing government expenditure but by leveraging on technology, and this will entail use of Wi-Fi emails for efficient communication. Five, reviewing the insurance schemes, especially looking at EDU, AFIA, indigence, public service, police, and prison commissions and independent offices under the universal health coverage, and align them to the Social Health Insurance Fund. The Social Health Insurance Fund now will be important because it will afford all Kenyans a universal health care with more benefits. Sixth, suspending the policy of SAGAs investing surplus funds and enforce the requirement of PFM Act 2012 and the PFM Regulations 2015 to surrender such funds to the Exchequer. And finally, reviewing the regional development authorities to remove duplication of laws within those county governments and MDAs. Since the beginning of this financial year, the government has also implemented initiatives to contain the growth of expenditures. First, the government has undertaken measures to reduce spending to non-priority expenditures. Second, the public-private partnership framework targets commercially viable projects, but also considers the contingent liabilities that come under this framework. And third, we are reviewing the portfolio of externally funded projects with a view to restructuring and realigning them with bottom-up economic transformation agenda. All these initiatives, Mr. Speaker, will help lower the expenditures. I now turn to revenue measures, revenue projections. Mr. Speaker, with the policy measures and structural reforms highlighted above, we project total revenue corrections, including appropriations in aid for the financial year 2024-2025 budget, to be Kenya shillings 3,343.2 billion, equivalent to 18.5% of GDP. Of this, ordinary revenue is projected to be Kenya shillings 2,917.2 billion, equivalent to 16.2% of GDP. Ministerial appropriations in aid is projected to be 426 billion shillings. Grants to this budget are provided at Kenya shillings 51.8 billion, which is 0.3% of GDP. Expenditure projections. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure in the financial year 2024-2025 budget is projected at Kenya shillings 3,992 billion, or 22.1% of GDP. Of this, the recurrent expenditure will amount to Kenya shillings 2,840 billion, or 15.7% of GDP. The development expenditures, including allocations to domestic and foreign finance projects, contingency fund, and even equalization fund, is Kenya shillings 707.4 billion, equivalent to 3.9% of GDP. Total allocation to county governments is projected at Kenya shillings 444.5 billion, of which equitable share is 400.1 billion. Fiscal balance. Mr. Speaker, given the projected revenue grants against the projected expenditures, the fiscal deficit including grants is projected at 597 billion, equivalent to 3.3% of GDP, and this is down from Kenya shillings 925 billion, or 5.7% of GDP in 2023-2024. In this respect, the primary balance will improve to a surplus of 2.3% of GDP from a deficit of 0.4% of GDP in the current financial year. The fiscal deficit for 2024-2025 will be financed by net external borrowing of 333.8 billion, equivalent to 1.8% of GDP, and net domestic borrowing of 263.2 billion, which is equivalent to 1.5% of GDP. Public debt management. Mr. Speaker, Kenya meets its obligations promptly, and no debt arrears have been accumulated. Public debt is projected to remain within sustainable levels on account of fiscal consolidation path that reflects the decline in the ratio of debt to GDP in present value terms over the medium term. To improve Kenya's debt sustainability and boost our credit rating position, the government will continue to implement measures to enhance growth of foreign exchange earnings. Our medium-term debt management strategy aims at lowering the cost and risks in the debt portfolio. In this regard, the government will slow down uptake of new external commercial debt and undertake liability management operations through debt swaps and other innovative solutions. The government will also diversify sources of financing through issuance of Panda Board, Samurai Board, and Skook in diverse financial markets in China, Japan, and the Gulf regions, respectively. The government will maximize use of concessional financing from bilateral and multilateral institutions to improve the debt sustainability and boost our credit rating. Let me turn to public-private partnership framework, Mr. Speaker. Due to the limited fiscal space, the government will continue to scale up the use of public-private partnership financing for commercially viable projects. Currently, there are 37 projects at various stages of PPP project cycle. In order to enhance viability of PPP projects, I will soon be proposing amendments to the PFM Act 2012 to speed up the process of financial close, as well as ensure that the related fiscal cost and contingent liabilities are within acceptable levels. Let me turn to public investment management. Mr. Speaker, in order to increase efficiency and effectiveness of public spending, the government will continue to implement public investment management regulations at the national government and commence a rollout of county governments. The regulations are aimed at streamlining and initiating execution and delivery of public projects within the timelines. Further, the government will roll out public investment management information system to all MDAs to improve the management of development projects in the country. Strengthening financial management reforms is very critical, and now I'll turn to this migration to accrual accounting, Mr. Speaker. The transition to accrual accounting from cash basis marks a significant milestone in our nation's journey to strengthening public finance management. In recognition of this, the Cabinet in March 2024 approved the transition from cash to accrual basis of accounting to improve cash management. and enhance the financial and fiscal reporting. The accrual accounting will enable the government to account for all assets and liabilities, including all government assets. With accrual accounting, we will also be able to account for all pending bills, public debt, and pension liabilities. Mr. Speaker, this is an important step to strengthen the public finance management, and I will therefore direct all MDAs and county governments to migrate to accrual accounting starting July 2024. This effectively means, Mr. Speaker, that the last financial statement to be prepared on cash basis by national and county governments will be for the financial year 2023-2024. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to Treasury Single Account. Mr. Speaker, the PFM Act 2012 and its attendant registration provides for the establishment of the Treasury Single Account, TSA as we call it, system at both national and county government levels. Based on the experience over the last 10 years since the enactment of PFM Act 2012, the need to review the scope of TSE implementation has become apparent. To improve public cash management, it is necessary to operationalize other elements of the TSA system and that are envisaged in the law. The automation of government payments through the Integrated Financial Management Information System, IFMIS, and the Central Bank of Kenya Internet Banking, IB, system forms a good basis to widen the scope of Treasury Single Account system. The National Treasury undertook an inventory of bank accounts and balances held by public sector entities in various financial institutions and established that as at 30th June 2023, these entities held Kenya shillings 431.7 billion with various financial institutions. These large cash balances were not immediately accessible at the time when the government was very cash strained. Mr. Speaker, to address this challenge and underscore the government's unwavering commitment for fiscal discipline, transparency, and efficiency in the management of public finances, the Cabinet approved the implementation of Treasury Single Account system in a clustered approach. The system will consolidate government cash resources into a single account held at the Central Bank of Kenya and sub-treasury single accounts at the commercial banks. The National Treasury in this respect will establish a treasury function to manage the TSA and the TSA sub-account structure so that every day the government financial position is known and ascertained. The migration of the TSA system commences on 1st July 2024. Let me now turn to resource allocation under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Mr. Speaker, let me turn the highlights to government spending priorities in the coming financial year. And in light of the revenue challenges, significant expenditure demands, spending in the financial year 2024 to 2025 will focus on bottom-up economic transformation agenda priorities on 5 core areas with the highest impact on the economy. The first one will be agricultural transformation and inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, the government focus will be on agricultural transformation and inclusive growth through the value chains approach. This aims at providing adequate and affordable working capital to all farmers through cooperative societies. This, we consider them as aggregators, and deploy the modern agricultural risk management instruments that ensure farming is profitable and incomes are predictable. In addition, it aims to transform farmers from food deficit to surplus producers through input finance, subsidies, and intensive agricultural extension support. This will raise productivity of key food value chains, reduce dependence on basic food imports, revamp underperforming export crops, and expand to new high-value emerging crops, and boost tea value chain through breeding and branding. Mr. Speaker, to attain food and nutrition security, I proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 54.6 billion for various programs under this sector. This includes Kenya shillings 10 billion for the fertilizer subsidy program, Kenya shillings 6.1 billion for the National Agricultural Value Chain Development Project, Kenya shillings 2.5 billion for the Enable Youth Program, Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for the enable youth and women in agriculture, Kenya shillings 747 million for small-scale irrigation value chain, irrigation and value addition project, Kenya shillings 642.5 million for the food security and crop diversification project. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for de-risking, inclusive and value enhancement of pastoral economies program, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for livestock value chain support project, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for Kenya livestock commercialization program, Kenya shillings 192.5 million for the embryo transfer project. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 300 million for the development leather industrial park, Kenani. Mr. Speaker, to support the growth of the brew economy, I propose a total of Kenya shillings 11.3 billion to the brew economy and fisheries subsector. This includes 3.7 billion to aquaculture business development project, Kenya shillings 3.1 billion to the Kenya Marine Fisheries and Socio-Economic Development Project, Kenya shillings 540 million for rehabilitation of fish riding sites, Kenya shillings 695.5 million for Riwatoni Ultra Modern Fish Hub, and Kenya shillings 600 million for marine fish assessment. Mr. Speaker, to raise agricultural productivity, enhance resilience to climate change risks in targeted smallholder farming and even pastoral communities, I propose an allocation of 340 million shillings towards adding drought and emergencies project. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of land ownership and settle the land race, I propose a sum of 5.5 billion. This allocation will cater for the processing and registration of the title deeds, settlement of the land race, digitization of the land registry, georeferencing of land parcels, and construction of land registries. Second, I want to turn to transforming micro, small, and medium enterprises economy. Mr. Speaker, accessibility and affordable credit to most Kenyans at the bottom of the pyramid remains a challenge. To address this challenge, the government is proposing an additional allocation of 5 billion shillings to the Financial Inclusion or Hustlers Fund to scale up access to credit for households and MSMEs. I also propose an additional 200 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya shillings 162.5 million for the Center for Entrepreneurship Project, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for rural Kenya Financial Inclusion Facility. Third, let me turn to housing and settlement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government's commitment to turn the housing challenge into an economic opportunity to create quality jobs for the youth directly in the construction sector and indirectly through the production of building products. This will be achieved through, among other measures, facilitating a delivery of 200,000 houses per annum and enabling low-cost housing mortgages. To continue supporting this initiative, I have proposed an allocation of 92.1 billion shillings for the housing, urban development, and public works. This includes Kenya shillings 8.3 billion under the Kenya Urban Program, Kenya shillings 3 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for enhancement of the company's capital as well as for lending to the primary mortgage lenders, Kenya shillings 32.5 billion for construction of affordable housing units, Kenya shillings 15 billion for the construction of social housing unit, Kenya shillings 14.7 billion for social and physical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocation to the housing, urban development, and public works include 11.3 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 3, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of markets, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the National Slum Upgrading Program, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya prisons, Kenya shillings 496.3 million for the construction of food bridges, Kenya shillings 444 million targeted to support construction of county headquarters that are targeted. Fourth, universal healthcare coverage. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed and determined to realize the constitutional right to health by promoting access to quality and affordable healthcare through universal healthcare coverage program. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of 127 billion to the health sector to support various activities and programs. These include 4.2 billion for Kenya shillings, 4.2 billion for universal health care coverage, coordination and management unit, Kenya shillings 2 billion for free maternity health care, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for managed equipment services, Kenya shillings 861.5 million to provide medical cover for the orphans, elderly and severely disabled persons in our society, Kenya shillings 4.6 billion to cater for the stipend